Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for Continuing Church of God. And I want to talk about the King of the West. Is there a nation in the world right now that could be called the King of the West? Does the Bible talk about a King of the West or not? I'm going to be using the New King James Version. I'm going to start with Luke 13:29. You don't have to go there, but this is something that Jesus taught. The only reason I'm not going is just one verse, but it's an important verse. It says, "They will come from the east and the west, from the north and the south, and sit down in the kingdom of God." So we see people from all around the world, including the West, are to be in the kingdom of God. Now, students of Bible prophecy know that there's an end-time king of the north, there's an end-time king of the south, and there are kings of the east. Now, these leaders are portrayed as political military leaders and not religious leaders. Now, it's true that the Bible does not say that there's a king of the West in terms of using that exact expression. But could there be one? Well, Protestant pastor John Hagee thinks there is. Now, he's been wrongly involved with things like blood moons, and he also is wrong, in my opinion, about things like he thinks Russia's a king of the north, and I'll talk about that maybe a little later. But he claims the king of the West is the Antichrist. Now, I mentioned a moment ago, the other kings the Bible talks about are political military leaders, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But he says it's the Antichrist. Well, the Bible says the Antichrist is predominantly a religious leader, and the final Antichrist is not the king of the West. And we'll go to who could be the king of the West and why in a little bit. If there is such a thing, what happens to this particular king? Now, pretty much everybody realizes there's a portion of the earth called the Western Hemisphere. There's the Eastern Hemisphere, which consists of Africa and Asia and Europe, and I guess you could even include Australia in that. Then there's the Western Hemisphere, which basically is North and South America, which was finally called the New World a few centuries ago when the people over in Europe found out it was really here. Is it possible that the King of the West would be located in the Western Hemisphere? Does Bible prophecy talk about anything like that? And is there a nation in the Western Hemisphere that perhaps came out of Europe or the United Kingdom area or something that could be this King of the West? And if so, what happens to that, the King of the West, and any other supporters? Now, as I mentioned before, the Bible literally does say that there will be kings from the east in Revelation 16, verse 12. Literally, the translation actually is kings who are from the risings of the sun. And basically, historically, people have considered that to be places like China, Japan, Korea, Russia, by the way, which is probably the most eastern country, depending on how the land goes, because the land keeps going on from Russia. So we've got kings of the east, and they are going to be militarily preparing for to gather at Armageddon. The Bible talks about that. And in the other thing about these kings, if you think about Asia, is that they don't really have a lot of kings of Asia particularly. For example, the head of Russia is the president. And China doesn't technically have a king anymore. Japan's kind of got an emperor, but he's not really in charge either. The same thing with Korea. So this particular king may not be an actual king in terms of having royalty. And furthermore, in the book of Daniel, chapter 11, it talks about somebody called the King of the North in places like verse 40, but Daniel 11:21, it specifically says he will not be given the honor of royalty, but the Bible calls him a king. Okay, so when I use the term King of the West, I'm not saying someone literally has to be a royal, is what we would call that. Now, of course, the United States itself, getting to the United States for a second, we don't officially have royalty, but certainly the leading military power in the world today, and certainly the leading power in the Western Hemisphere. And it's also a nation that happens to be west of Jerusalem. And so in those senses, you could say the United States is the king of the West. Now, the United States has essentially been the king of the West since somewhere around World War I or World War II, perhaps at the beginning of that, toward the end of it. And I found some news items and some reports that, like, for example, the USA is the de facto leader of the West. America is the leader of the West. And I don't need to give the sources, but people will say that. People have tended to say that. Now, although the term United States of America and the terms Great Britain, the United Kingdom, are not specifically mentioned in the Bible talks about some blessings that the descendants of Jacob were going to have. In Genesis 24:60, however, before I get to Jacob, I want to read something that was told to Rebekah, who became the mother of Jacob. And this was when Abraham had sent his servant over to get a wife for his son Isaac. So she's on the way to leave, and the Bible records this is what was said to her. Our sister, may you become the mother of thousands of tens thousands. Okay, so tens of millions here. And may your descendants possess the gates of those who hate them. And many sea gates, and we'll get to that later, went into the hands of her descendants. Now, in the book of Genesis, if you were Genesis 24, let's go to Genesis 28. Starting in verse 10, the Bible shows that God gave Jacob, Rebekah's son, a dream. In verse 10 it says, Now Jacob went out from Beersheba, and he went toward Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took out one of the stones of that place, he put it on his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and it reached to heaven, and there were angels of God ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I'm the Lord God of Abraham, your father, and God of Isaac, and on the land which you lie, I will give you and your descendants, and also your descendants will be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east and the north and the south, and you and your seed through all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and bring you back to this land. I won't leave you till I've done what I've spoken to you. In verse 16, and Jacob woke from his sleep, saying, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. So Jacob wasn't expecting to have some kind of dream, didn't know God would be there. Probably was kind of a desolate area as far as what I've been able to read about it. So he's like, wow. So to use the vernacular, God sometimes works in mysterious ways. So he seemed to see that. Well, anyway, this dream showed that Jacob would have descendants in the north. We believe that would include, for example, Northern Europe. And in the south, that would include places like Australia and New Zealand. And in the east, the Jewish historian, first century historian Josephus said that the lost tribes of Israel at that time were east of the Euphrates during his time, and as well as the west, which we believe includes the United States and Canada. And we have an article at the cogwriter.com website called Anglo-America in Prophecy and the Lost Tribes of Israel. So I'm not going to try to prove all of that today, but I do want to kind of give a little bit of background. Give a little bit more, too. If you're in Genesis, I'll give you a moment to get to Genesis 49. So we see that God gave Jacob a dream. God still uses dreams to this day. But also, we see something prophesied by Jacob. Verse 1 of Genesis 49. And Jacob called his sons and said, Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Okay, this is an end-time prophecy. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Okay, so we're going to go down to verse 22. Now this is a prophecy to Joseph, who is one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And Joseph had 2 sons. It says, Joseph is a fruitful bough by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers had bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. Verse 24. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. For there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Verse 25. By the God of your fathers who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and the crown of his head of him who is separate from his brothers. So there's a prophecy about someone who's going to be different than the rest. wealthier than the rest, very indifferent to the rest, and separated from the rest. And if you look at the descendants of Joseph, as Ephraim and Manasseh, the two children, his two sons, turns out many went to the British Isles, which is separated from continental Europe by the English Channel at least. Then you've got those over in Canada, United States, separated by a big ocean. And then you've got some over in Australia, New Zealand, who are kind of separated from just about everybody that particular way. Now, the fact about having being a fruitful bough and branches running over indicates a colonizing people, and perhaps no people did more colonizing than the British. And as many will recall, they used to say that the sun never set in the British Empire because it covered so much of the world. Now, let's go back a little bit to Genesis chapter 48. So you're pretty close. And it says, starting verse 19, this is Jacob, Israel speaking. Jacob's name was also Israel. God changed his name to Israel. He said, verse 16, bless the lads, and this is talking about Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And going down to verse 19, it says, he'll be a people will also be great, but his younger brother will be greater than him, and the descendants will become a multitude of nations. Let's talk about that for just a moment. The British Commonwealth was a commonwealth of nations, many nations, perhaps the biggest number of nations in anything like that, actually in the history of humanity. And in that particular respect, the old British Empire was greater. On the other hand, we see a prophecy here about Manasseh being great, and no one that I'm aware of will dispute the fact that the United States has a certain greatness. They may not respect the United States, they may not like it now, in terms of power, wealth, etc. It's been a great nation. Interestingly, and I don't have this in my notes, so I'll go from my memory on this, I ran across some Jewish interpretations of this that basically said, that one would be great, meaning Ephraim, and having all these nations, but the elder would actually perhaps even in certain respects be greater. Now I mention this because this came from a Jewish interpretation, and frequently people have accused the Church of God, the Radio Church of God, Worldwide Church of God, and say the Continuing Church of God, that this is just some idea that there's no way, no Jew ever would have thought of this. And the reality is, no, some Jewish scholars say, this is consistent. Now going down to verse 20, Jacob or Israel speaking, he said, so we blessed them in that day, saying, by you Israel will bless, saying, may God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. Or in modern terms, would you like your nation to be rich like the old British Commonwealth of the United States? Well, most nations would say yes. Now, we'll not talk about the sins and other issues in the United States. We'll get to some of that a little bit later. But this is a prophecy of greatness. And this has happened. Now, even though in terms of birth order, Manasseh was born first, and we say, well, wait a second, Ephraim became great before Manasseh did. You don't have to go there, but Jeremiah 31:9, God says, Ephraim was my firstborn. So Ephraim was supposed to take the firstborn position, and again, got its greatness earlier. Now let's go back down to Genesis 28. I read this once before, but I want to read it again. This is something that God promised Jacob. It says also, your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and the east, the north and the south. In you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Well, in terms of invention, commerce, etc., the United Kingdom and the United States have blessed nations of the earth. But I find it interesting, he starts off, you shall spread abroad to the west. He starts off with the west, so I thought that's interesting. Now, it is true that the British Isles are somewhat west of Jerusalem, but they're way more north. But the United States and Canada are definitely on the western side. And the United States has had a leadership role for quite some time. But the world is believing, or starting to say, that the United States is losing it. Now, I'm going to go back a couple of years, and this sermon is not intended to be political, okay? But I want to read something from November 14th, 2016, from Der Spiegel, which is a German publication, respected mainstream German publication. The title is, "America has abdicated its leadership of the West." So Der Spiegel is saying the United States is the leader of the West. And here's what it says: "For 100 years, the United States was the leader of the free world. With the election of Donald Trump, America has now abdicated that role. It's time for Europe to step into the void." And it says that Donald Trump is sworn in as president. The United States is going to celebrate its funeral as the leader of the world. He said the West was constituted in its modern form in January 1917. Okay, when Woodrow Wilson talked about the United States had a responsibility for peace and justice, and then later to make the world safe for democracy and all that kind of stuff. So the United States assumed the leadership of the Western world. It was in the early phase of political globalization. Then we have Donald Trump, it says. So what will happen to the West, to Europe, to Germany, without the United States as its leading power? So again, mainstream publication, the United States has been a leading power. What are we supposed to do? Germany, as a child of the West, particularly the United States, was brought to life with American generosity. Okay, so they're acknowledging the United States helped, and it's now in a deep state of shock. The American president always simultaneously was our president, at least a little. Now we must come to terms with the lack of Western leadership. America was long the benchmark of the West, but if Trump governs as he promised during the campaign, the land of the free, it's abdicated its role. Then it must be Europe's turn. Now this is, next thing I'm going to tell you is not in my notes, but it was in the news today. I went to a German website, news site called Deutsche Welle, and it says, "Oh no, Donald Trump did what he said he was going to do. We hoped, our big hope was he wasn't going to do it." And that this is causing all kinds of problems with them, and they're trying to figure out what they ought to do about it. I've got several pages of notes that I've decided I'm going to take a chance and skip them, even though it's quite a few pages here. But let me tell you what basically it has to do with. There are various promises that were promised to the descendants of Israel, and those blessings were withheld for about 2,520 years. And if you start from the time when the Assyrians took over the kingdom to the time when Great Britain became sort of one of the rulers of the world, or one of the main rulers of the world, around 1800. It ends up being 2,520 years. And since that time, the United States and the United Kingdom, for a period of time, controlled, I think, something like 75% of the wealth of the world. Some huge amount. Some huge amount. Now, those nations were promised blessings, but they also were promised cursings. Okay, God said that He would bless them. He would bless Abraham's descendants, and He did. But He said, you've got to do things God's way. If you won't do the right thing, He says you're going to have some problems. Now, as far as the blessing to Abraham, let's just read one on that first before I go into some other parts of this. Let's go to Genesis 22. In Genesis 22, we read about the fact that God had asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, his only son. And he went to do it, and God stopped him and had him sacrifice a ram instead. But it showed God that Abraham was faithful. So notice what God promised, Genesis 22, starting verse 16. "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing, you have not withheld your son, your only son." And in that respect, Isaac was a type of Christ, because the Father sent Jesus to die for our sins, sent His Son to die for us. "Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed shall all nations of earth be blessed, because you've obeyed my voice." And various things, again, from the United States, the United Kingdom, have blessed many in the world. Now notice that the descendants of Abraham were promised the gates of their enemies. Now, in the Church of God, we've historically considered this to include things which we call sea gates. So I went to dictionary.com, said, well, what do you call a sea gate? And they say a sea gate, it's a noun. It's a navigational channel giving access to the sea. And that's certainly part of the definition. But for the purpose of the sermon, my use of a sea gate implies that some government has land and is able to exert some kind of control over some kind of a channel that's near that land. For example, Gibraltar is at the mouth, if you will, of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, I tend to use my hands to map a lot. And so if the Mediterranean Sea looks like this, Gibraltar's actually right around here. And it can kind of control things going in and out. So we consider that to be like a sea gate, if you will. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, and I'll give you a moment to get over there, there's a warning from God. Well, God certainly did promise to bless the descendants of Israel and Abraham, to get various blessings, including the gates of their enemies. Notice what happens. These blessings were given, but they weren't permanent because God gave a criteria here to pay attention to. This is a warning, God said. Verse 58 of Deuteronomy 28. If you do not carefully observe all the words of this law that are written in this book, that you may fear this glorious and awesome name, the eternal your God, or Yahweh your God, then the Lord will bring upon you and your descendants extraordinary plagues, great and prolonged plagues, and serious and prolonged sicknesses. Moreover, he'll bring back on you all the disease of Egypt, which you're afraid, and they shall cling to you. Also every sickness and plague which is not written in the books of this law, the Lord will bring upon you till you're destroyed. You'll be left few in number, whereas you were as the stars of heaven in multitude, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Verse 63. And it shall be that just as the Lord rejoiced over you for good and multiply you, so the Lord will rejoice over you and destroy you and bring you to nothing, and you shall be plucked off from the land which you go to possess. Now consider that for many years the major sea gates of the world were controlled by the United States and the United Kingdom. For example, the United States had the Panama Canal, which I've visited. The United States still has a bunch of locations in the Pacific Ocean, but I think eventually they'll lose them as well. Now, the British Empire had the Straits of Malacca, Singapore, the Suez Canal. Bab el-Mandeb had the Straits of Hormuz, Simon's Town, or the Cape of Good Hope. It had a country called Malta. It still has Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands, but it lost the others, and I believe that it ultimately will lose Gibraltar and the Falkland Islands, basically because of disobedience. People didn't stop to consider, wait a second, they had all these sea gates and they had all this power. The British Empire had much of that, and now it's lost most of it, more and more of it. People who don't pay attention to Bible prophecy or don't believe in what's called Anglo-Israelism, I guess, and perhaps I should explain that. By Anglo-Israelism, we do not teach, by the way, that only descendants of Israel will be saved. We teach that Gentiles will be saved. And by the way, I am predominantly Gentile, so I want to make that clear. We do not teach that salvation is limited to Anglo descendants or anything. What we do teach is that God made certain promises to Abraham and his descendants. Jacob was inspired by God to give prophecies that were going to affect Joseph and Joseph's children. So we believe the United States and the United Kingdom were beneficiaries of these promises, but we also believe to whom much is given, much is required. And so those who receive the blessings will be held to a higher standard and held accountable. So don't think we're teaching any kind of superiority about one or the other. God made promise, he kept it, but he said, look, I'm going to give these blessings, but if you don't do right, if you turn away from trying to follow the words of this book, you're going to have curses and you're going to lose your land. And that's what we teach. Now, there's a few interesting prophecies in the Bible that I believe clearly point to the United States. Now, they may not be clear when you first read them, because the Bible says you got to go here a little, there a little, to kind of put some things together. First one I wanted to go to, however, is one from Daniel chapter 11, and I want to go starting in verse 29. There's something that's going to happen at the appointed time. Now, I believe we were very close to this appointed time. Maybe maybe 3 or 4 years away from it, maybe a little bit longer. I think it'd be within the next decade or so. But anyway, so this is an end-time prophecy. And it says, and I'll read it from the New King James, and I'm going to comment about that in just a moment. At the appointed time, he shall return and go toward the south. This particular he is the European king of the north. But you can read about other verses and that says who it is. But it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. So I want to talk about a couple of things here. One thing is, this is kind of interesting. What happens is, this king is going south. Some naval force, some ships are there, and he gets upset. But he doesn't seem to be upset against the ships. He's upset against the Holy Covenant, which essentially, I believe, means he's upset with true Christians who are saying, by the way, this guy is the king of the north. He's going to be he's the beast of Revelation. He's going to be in league with the Antichrist. And we're going to identify this. And he's not going to like this. So you see, he gets mad. And he's enraged against the Holy Covenant. You think he'd be enraged against the ships who came against him. But no, he's enraged against somebody saying what his plan is, because he didn't want anyone to know it. And notice that he's going to be happy. He's going to show regard, favor to those who fell away from the truth. Okay? Now, the other focus I want to make on this is I want to read verse 30 from the CEV, which says, verse 30, ships from the west shall come to attack him, and he'll be discouraged. Then he'll start back to his own country and take out his anger on the religion of God's faithful people, while showing kindness to those who are unfaithful. So I realize that the CV isn't always a perfect translation, but actually this term Cyprus isn't actually in there. It actually is the word Kittim, which means western lands. Now think about this. In the 21st century, if a European power was going toward the Middle East, who would stop it? Okay, well, you could say, well, Russia maybe. Okay, well, we'll get to Russia and China later. Okay, Latin America? No, they don't really have a significant navy. They do have navies, by the way, and they do have some submarines and that kind of stuff. But I really, really don't think that any particular country in Latin America, I mean, Brazil's the biggest one. I don't see that they would be interested in a confrontation against the European leader there. And they don't have the power anyway. There's like, well, 400 or 500 million. There's actually, technically right now, we're 500 million people in the EU. We'll see what happens to the UK's part of this. But they're huge. It's not that. Who could possibly have that kind of power? I believe this is a reference to the United States. And we'll get to that in a moment. Now I'm going to read from the GWT, which is God's Word translation. The CEV is Contemporary English Version. I'm sorry, I should have said what it is. Again, Daniel 11, verse 30. Ships will come from the west to attack him. He's going to be discouraged and turn back. Angry at the holy promise, he'll return and take action in favor of those who abandon the holy promise. Now, this particular action is going to take place just prior to the start of the Great Tribulation. Now, this is always been the position, or long been the position of the Church of God. For example, the late Pastor General of the Worldwide Church of God, Herbert Armstrong, discussed this in the sermon called Times and Seasons, March 15, 1980. If you are a Roman Catholic, or if you're a Protestant, you have respect for one of their saints, Jerome, who was a doctor of their church. He said that this was an end-time event involving the forces of Antichrist. Forces of Antichrist being the ones that were coming down from Europe. So that's what Jerome said. This is Jerome's commentary on Daniel chapter 11, by the way. Now, I find this interesting because there's another prophecy in Numbers chapter 24. You can go to verse 24 if you want. I'm going to read it from some other translations. In verse 14 of Numbers 24, it says, this is a prophecy for the latter days. Okay, so it's an end-time prophecy. And the Bible in Basic English says, verse 24, ships will come from the direction of Kittim. That means from the west, troubling Asher and troubling Eber, and like others of their fate, be destruction. Now Asher, this particular Asher, is Assyria, which many people in the Church of God have pointed out is a reference to the Germanic peoples in Central Europe. Young's literal translation, by the way, says, and ships are from the side of Chittim, it means from the west. They've humbled Asher, and they've humbled Eber, and is also forever is perishing. Now notice it says they humbled them. That means the king of the north is coming down with some ships, and somebody's stopped him, and he's going to be humbled by it. But in Daniel we find he isn't so mad at the one who stopped him. He's mad at religion. And I believe this is a reference to what we teach in the Continuing Church of God. The Orthodox Jewish Bible says, by the way, and ships will come from the coast of Kittim and shall afflict Asher, Assyria, and shall afflict Ever, and shall be unto destruction. So the Orthodox Jewish Bible actually says this Asher is a reference to Assyria. Okay? And so anyway, the direction of Kittim and Cyprus is to the west. It's from that direction, but it's not from Cyprus itself. This is not a reference to the little country of Cyprus, which is Turkish on the top and Greek on the bottom, having some massive army stopping the Europeans. Okay, Cyprus is part of the European Union. Okay, this is not a reference to that. Now, I'd like to read something from a couple of Catholic writings. One is from a book called The History of Antichrist, and it's got an imprimatur from the Bishop of Montreal, and it says, referring to Daniel chapter 11, verse 30, it seems probable he will be defeated by certain people of the Western nations. Okay, so this is a Roman Catholic interpretation. This is it was translated in English in 1884, so this is not a new thing. Okay, so this wasn't, oh, they saw the United States, so it's got to be the United States. No, this isn't that way. But a Catholic interpretation of this, which I believe is accurate, is that certain people of the Western nations will give him a naval battle, but he will soon recover from the defeat, and we'll get to that later. But we'll see, as I said, he's coming down, and something upsets him. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a reference to a power from the West. And the only other powers, big naval powers, would be, for example, China, who's building their navy up right now, and Russia. But when you read the passages in Daniel, it's not until Daniel 11:44 that the king of the north is bothered by people from the north and from the east. Well, what could be north of Europe? Well, anything north of Europe is Russia. And east, well, you've got China and other places. They don't get involved this early. Again, these are ships from the west. And this is definitely, in my opinion, a reference from to the United States. Now, something interesting, and this is from a Countess Francesca de Biliante, who is a Catholic writer. She's some kind of one of their prophetesses, and I'll talk about that in just a second. It says, when the land of the great fleet enters the Mediterranean, then Europe will tremble. God will save Rome. Now, I'm going to make two comments about this, maybe three. First of all, from time to time people have criticized me from occasionally bringing up non-biblical prophecies. Aside from the fact that the Apostle Paul did something similar in Acts chapter 17, the old Radio Church of God did it repeatedly, by the way, including with Mayan prophecy, by the way. And people such as Theophilus of Antioch, who we consider to be a Church of God leader, he did it extensively. And the reason that, for example, Theophilus and Paul did it was to connect with their audience. But I find this kind of interesting because in this particular writing, a Catholic priest who reported this wrote that the Great Fleet would be from England or the United States, ? So he thought that this woman had a vision that the land of the Great Fleet enters the Mediterranean and it's going to cause Europe to tremble. Well, we just read in Daniel 11, verse 30, 29 and 30, okay, the king of the north is going to come down. Some ship people are going to bother him. He's not going to like it. And it says God will save Rome. I believe that a demon inspired this woman to say this. Well, why am I quoting a demon? Because this demon is trying to tell these people, when this happens, don't worry about it. The beast and the Antichrist are going to win anyway. Of course, she didn't throw that part in. But that's what it really means. So we in the Church of God, when we see this happen, we know that Europe's not going to be defeated yet, because we read Daniel chapter 11, not because of what this woman had to say. But I just found it interesting because I had figured out that this had to be a reference to the United States at least 5 years before I read this prophecy. Okay? Unless you think, oh, I read Catholic prophecies and I change the view. I had the view the other way. I just found it fascinating. I would do that. Now, we have a sermon about the great monarch. And there are a variety of Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic prophecies about a leader who's going to rise up and they think is a good guy. Now, a few Catholic prophecies indicate he's a bad guy. I think those are the ones that are actually correct. But a lot of them think he's a good guy. And they say this monarch is going to rise up. His dominion is going to extend from the east to the west. So he's going to end up with the west. And one of their saints, Cataldus of Torrentino, around 500 AD, said the great monarch will conquer England and the other island empires. England, Australia, New Zealand come to mind. There are other Catholic prophecies specifically, by the way, the United States is going to be defeated because of things such as homosexuality and abortion and all that kind of stuff. But the one I found kind of interesting is one from the 13th century. A guy by the name Worden of the Ortorante. He said the great monarch and the Pope will precede the Antichrist and the capital of the world will fall. Well, if the world has a capital right now, it's been considered the United States, at least for the West. And so I believe that we should consider that this is a reference to the United States. Now, it should be mentioned that U.S. President Trump, by the way, has been referred to both seriously and mockingly as the king of the world. Okay? And so, by the way, was Barack Obama. So the idea of the United States as the capital of the world is kind of consistent with some people out in the world have actually said. So I don't think that's a real stretch. Now, let's go to Jeremiah chapter 30. Now, I mentioned before, when we talk about Anglo-Israelism, we don't teach white supremacy or any of that kind of nonsense. We teach that God gave blessings to certain peoples, but that the Great Tribulation is going to start and affect them first. And, for example, in Jeremiah 30, starting in verse 7, says, "Alas, for that day is great. There is none like it. It's a time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." When Jacob Israel was blessing Ephraim and Manasseh, he said, "Let my name be placed upon them." And so I believe this is Jacob's trouble referring to those particular descendants. Now, the United States and the UK, etc., unless they repent, they're going to be taken slaves, defeated and taken slaves. In verse 8, though, it says that it'll eventually end. "For it shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord of hosts, I'll break his yoke from your neck and burst you from your bonds. Foreigners shall no more enslave them." So yes, we in the Continuing Church of God do teach that unless there's massive repentance in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, I hope I didn't miss any of the major ones there I was trying to say, they will be defeated and taken slaves, but the slavery at some point in time will end. Now, this may not persuade you. This is a reference to the United States. One of the first times I did a radio interview related to Bible prophecy, somebody asked me a question. Now, this was done over the telephone. The guy was in the Midwest someplace. And I think he was a former Baptist who had become a Muslim. And we were going through some things, and he said, the Bible doesn't talk about the United States. Where does the United States mention Bible prophecy? Now, I did not expect that particular question. And I gave an immediate answer because one came to me. And I said, well, Daniel chapter 11, verse 39. So let me read that. It says, "Thus shall he act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain." The strongest fortresses. Who has the strongest fortresses? Well, in the 21st century, it's the United States, and to a lesser degree, it's English-speaking allies. Isaiah warns, in Isaiah 17:3 that the fortress will cease from Ephraim. But unlike Manasseh, Ephraim does not have the strongest fortresses. So Ephraim, being the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they don't have the strongest fortresses, and it says that fortresses will also cease from there. In this time, in the 21st century, the strongest fortresses are a reference to the United States. As I mentioned earlier, Daniel 11:39 cannot be referring to the Europeans as they're supporting the king of the north, and it's not referring to the Russians and Chinese or other Asians, because they didn't get involved until verse 44. The passage in Daniel 11 shows the end of the United States, which is why, even though after verse 39 we see a reference to the king of the north in Daniel 11 verse 40. Now let's go to Daniel 11 verse 40. Let's do this. See what happens after Daniel 11:39. After Daniel 11:39, we see some things going on here. So let's go into this. Verse 40. At the time of the end. So what time is it? The time of the end. The king of the south shall attack him. Who's the him? It's the king of the north. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. So okay, in verse 40, we find out there's two kings left after the United States. The power of the strongest fortresses is gone. Okay, that's why there's no king of the west. King of the south attacks the king of the north. And the king of the north responds with whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, many ships. So he's got ships, by the way, which is why I said before, when he comes down with ships, he's got some ships. He's got more than enough to deal with Latin America, who would be an ally, wouldn't be an enemy. He shall enter the countries and overwhelm them and pass through. Not just one. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. These will escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So he's coming down, and what's he coming down to do? He's taking action against the king of the south. The king of the south is a confederation of nations in the Middle East and North Africa. Right now, these are predominantly Islamic nations. So we see Egypt. He'll have power over the treasures of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt. And also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. I should comment that Libya doesn't technically just mean the nation of Libya. It's basically everything on the to the west of Egypt. It was what that land was. Okay? And the Ethiopians, that's a mistranslation. If you look at the actual word, it means Cushite. These would be like the Sudanese. Now, so we see a king of the north, the king of the south. I've referred to Russia and China. Well, here's where they get involved. Verse 44. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. He shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Now you say, wait a second. Aha, it doesn't say that these are kings. Verse 44. Well, let's go into Revelation chapter 16. Go to Revelation chapter 16. And verse 12 says, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. Okay, this is after the United States is gone. Got these bowls being poured out, etc. This is way after the United States is gone. And this is a reference to these people from the east and the north in Daniel 11:44. Russia is not the king of the north. Why? Because there's nothing that's north of Russia that would trouble Russia. If you look at the map, there's nothing north of Russia. Okay? I suppose you can get some ice in the North Pole. It's not Russia. Now, let's go to the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 50. I'll read a couple of verses there, starting verse 41. I guess I'll read 3 verses. By the way, where I come from, couple means 2 or 3. Not when it comes to marriage, just 2, but when we use the term couple. Verse 41. Behold, the people, Jeremiah 50, shall come from the north, and a great nation and many kings shall be raised up from the ends of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel, and they shall not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea. They shall ride on horses, set in array like a man in battle. Against you, O daughter of Babylon. Daughter of Babylon, this is a reference to not ancient Babylon. This is a reference to Mystery Babylon the Great, which you can read about in Revelation chapter 17. And that particular Babylon the Great sits on a city of 7 hills. And by the way, ancient Babylon was a plain. It wasn't it wasn't 7 hills like Rome. Okay? So the daughter of Babylon saying this isn't actually Babylon. Okay, this is somebody that took over Babylonian religions and all that kind of stuff. Notice they're bothered by the people from the north and from the ends of the earth. Well, Russia is on the ends of the earth to the north and on the east, as well as the allies at the end, which will include Eastern nations such as the Chinese and the Koreans and the Japanese will be involved. Yes, I think the Japanese by this stage will be involved as well. Continuing, verse 43. The king of Babylon has heard a report about them. His hands grows feeble. Anguish has taken a hold of him. Pangs like a woman in childbirth, which is consistent with what we read about the king of the north, how he's going to feel about verses 44 and 45. So, now getting back to the United States and all this, you might go to Amos 9 verse 10. I'm only going to read one verse. Many don't believe that the United States can get taken over. They just don't think it's possible. But that's actually prophesied. Amos 9 verse 10. All the sinners of my people shall die by the sword. What do they say? The calamity shall not overtake nor confront us. No, not us. We've got it made. We're the big power. We have the strongest fortresses. We're the great one. Yeah, Rome would never fall. The Third Reich actually did reasonably well if they would have not tried to fight so many sides, too many front wars. You say, but the Europeans wouldn't really want to do that. Well, let's go over to the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 10. As I mentioned before, unless the English-speaking people repent of their sins, their nations will be destroyed. And you can look that up, by the way, in Hosea 8, verses 1 through 13. But right now, we're going to go to Isaiah 10, starting in verse 1. I made a reference to Assyria being the heart or the power of the European beast that will rise up. And by the way, we have a sermon about that at the Continuing COG channel as well. But we also have a couple articles at the www.cogwriter.com website, that's cogwriter.com website, about the identity of Germany being with Assyria and in prophecy. But I'm just going to read this particular prophecy here, starting in verse 1. Woe to Assyria, verse 5, I'm sorry. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. I'm going to send them against an ungodly nation. Now, both the King James and the New Heart English Bible say, well, the King James says a hypocritical nation, and the New Heart English Bible calls it a profane nation. Literally, the Hebrew word is not ungodly, okay? And I think hypocritical or profane does it better. Against the people of my wrath, I'll give him charge to seize the spoil and take the prey. He's going to seize the spoil and tread them down like the mire of the streets. You say, but the Europeans don't want to do that. Well, verse 7 says, yet he doesn't mean so, nor does his heart think so. So he didn't think he wants to do it, but it's in his heart to destroy and cut off not a few nations, he says. Aren't my princes altogether kings? Isn't Calno like Carchemish, Hamath like Arpad? Is not Samaria like Damascus? And we have a sermon at the Continuing COG channel about the United States being tied to Samaria and prophecy that you might want to watch. We also have an article at the cogwriter.com website about that you can read as well. It says, as my hand has found the kingdoms of the idols whose carved images excelled those of Jerusalem and Samaria. As I've done to Samaria and her idols, shall I not do to Jerusalem and her idols? Now, you say, but aren't the Europeans sinful too? Well, yes. Verse 12. Comes to pass, when the Lord has performed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he'll say, I'll punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria, and for the glory of his haughty looks, because he thinks he did it by his own strength and by his own power. So you notice this person called the king of Assyria, but that king of Assyria is also the king of the north. He's not the king of the west. And in case you're a Catholic, verse 6 of Isaiah calls it a deceitful nation. And in many ways, I think the United States has become a deceitful nation. By doing such as promoting abortion, the LGBTQ agenda, pornography, and various other sins and abominations, the USA has become a profane or hypocritical nation. Now, if you go to, let's go to Daniel chapter 8, verse 24. You say, well, the United States and the United Kingdom and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, they're prosperous nations. Particularly if you go to some of these countries in Africa and some places in Asia and other parts of the world, or even parts of Latin America. Anyway, Daniel 8, verse 24 says, his power shall be mighty. Now this is the king of the north, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. He's going to destroy the mighty. A mighty power be the United States. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule. And that's one of the reasons why when he comes down with ships and the Church of God, the Philadelphia portion of the Church of God, he goes out and says, look, he's the king of the north. Don't believe him. He's not really here for peace. Through his cunning, that's why he gets mad at them. It says, through his cunning, he causes deceit to prosper under his rule. People will believe him and consider us to be extremists. So extremists to be censored or to shut up, to be kicked off the internet or whatever. It says, he shall exalt himself in his heart. Notice what he'll then do. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. People think, oh, it's just good here. It's always going to be good here. Anyway, is the United States mighty? Aren't many United States prosperous? In Revelation chapter 13, we read about this beast, and his head gets wounded, verse 3, his deadly wounds healed, the world marvels and follows the beast, and they worship him. The dragon gave authority to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who's like the beast? Who's able to make war with him? They're going to marvel because Europe taking over the United States? Oh, come on. Sounds like extremist rhetoric. Okay? Well, it's biblical. More and more things are lining up with biblical prophecies. We've got Europe, by the way, has established its own European structure for a military. The German defense minister, about a week and a half ago, said we've already pretty well on our way to a European army with all these nations working together. Things are starting to happen. And yes, the United States is actually encouraging this. Why? Because the leaders don't really understand the prophecies of this book. There might be some who understand parts of them, and I'm not going to discount that. But the idea that there's no king of the West because the United States is gone is something that people ought to consider. Now, some people say the biggest threat to the United States isn't going to possibly be Europe. It's going to be Muslims, Arabs, and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's an interesting prophecy in the book of Psalm. Psalm chapter 3, or the 83rd Psalm. I said chapter 3, I mean Psalm 83. Starting in verse 4, I want to read a prophecy. It says, they said, come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be remembered no more. For they've consulted together with one consent. They formed a confederacy against you. Okay, confederacy would be a group of nations or peoples. So the tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. Okay, this would be the Turks and the Arabs. Moab and Hagarites, we're talking about Jordan and Syria, etc. Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistine, the inhabitants of Tyre. So there's Lebanese, the Arabs, this would include the Egyptians, etc. So a confederacy is going to form. This confederacy, by the way, will end up being led by the one called the King of the South that we referred to in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 to 43. But notice what happens next. Assyria has joined them. They've helped the children of Lot. So the United States is apparently going to do something that the Arab world, the Islamic world, is not going to like. And they're going to want to do something about it. And they're going to get the Assyrians involved as well. And so this is something that is going to happen. Now this alliance between the Arab peoples and the Muslim peoples of the Middle East and North Africa and Europe will not last forever. But eventually, they will get together. And what's going to happen in the United States will not be good. Now some people think that we never have to worry about the Europeans because they're our friends. Well, ever since the Edward Snowden leaks, the Europeans have started to wonder about that. They said, wait a second. They started to see that the United States trusted the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. It was actually called the Five Eyes Alliance. And actually a week or two ago, it was in the news that the Europeans want to be treated the same as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. Now, they've been asking for this for years. And actually, U.S. President Barack Obama, when the U.S. got caught doing what it was doing, asked for that. And said we would do it. But apparently haven't done it as much as they want. They still want more information from us. And so it's interesting to me that what they're going to do is the United States is going to share more information. Well, one of the ways you would take over the United States is if an ally has a lot of information, a lot of things, and turns against the United States. Well, in the book of Lamentations, you might want to go there. I'd like to read something in Lamentations chapter 1. And start reading verse 1. It says, how lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow is she, who was great among the nations. The princes among the provinces have become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night. Her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers or allies, she has found none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. Her friends are going to become her enemies. And I believe this is what will happen to the United States. And I think this is also consistent, by the way, the old Worldwide Church of God, in an article in the Plain Truth magazine in January 1980, cited Lamentations 1:1, and talking about national captivity happening, and they pointed this particular prophecy. And then there was a booklet called The Modern Romans that also pointed out to this as a warning to modern America, and I believe that that's the case. And particularly now, that booklet came out in 1975. Well, then we were really tight with the Europeans, and now we're not so tight. The Europeans are having real concerns, and they think they need to do something. Now, the Bible warns us when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes. That's in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. In Jeremiah 18:22, you don't have to go there, it says, let a cry be heard from your houses when you bring a troop suddenly upon them. It's going to be kind of a surprise attack. Now, what's going to kind of trigger the end of the King of the West? There's a couple different things. Let's look at a warning in Isaiah chapter 30. Starting in verse 12. It says, therefore says the Holy One of Israel, because you despise this word and trust in oppression and perversity and rely on them, or you say that those things are good and those are rights and you're horrible if you don't support those views, therefore this iniquity shall be to you like a breach ready to fall, a bulge in a high wall whose breaking comes suddenly in an instant. More and more the Anglo-American nations are trusting in policies that encourage perversity. That, combined with rebellion will be against God, will be a reason why the United States will fall. Now, as far as to why it'll happen, here's another reason that the Bible tells us. Another interesting hint. This is the book of Habakkuk, Habakkuk chapter 2. And consider this with the King of the West, the financial King of the West, King of the world, if you will. The financial King of the world is the United States, the world's primary reserve currency, the U.S. dollar. But listen, verse 3, Habakkuk 2. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but the end it will speak. Those terms for Hebrew terms for appointed time and time of the end, the same ones are in Daniel chapter 11, by the way. It will not lie, though it tarries, wait for it, but it will surely come, it will not tarry. Verse 5. Indeed, because he transgresses by wine, he's a proud man. Verse 6. Will not these take up a proverb against them, a taunting riddle against them, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his, how long? And to him who loads himself many pledges. Will not your creditors rise up suddenly? Will not they awaken who oppress you? And you will become their booty. And you have plundered many nations, all the nations, or the people will plunder you. Well, the United States is the most indebted nation of all time in human history. It trusts in oppression and perversity, and it keeps increasing its debt. I actually looked up the debt today, and it was just a shade under $22 trillion official debt to the penny. Now that was or a couple of days ago, and I've been told with this government shutdown that the debt's actually going to be worse than that. So we're probably pretty close to it. The debt keeps going. And I actually found a commentary on Habakkuk from the ancient Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way. It says, God commanded Habakkuk to write the things that were to come upon the last generation. Okay, so it was an end-time prophecy. So it was not just my opinion of this, by the way. Again, it said the appointed time at the end. But then years later, I read this thing from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, back 2,000 years ago, someone said, no, this is not fulfilled anciently. And some claim in the church of other groups that this is fulfilled anciently, and that's not the case. And by the way, this was not a prophecy for the nation of Israel, the little tiny nation over there. They don't have enemy creditor nations. Okay, not like the United States does. Now, go to Ezekiel chapter 22. I want to read some things starting verse 13. One thing to the shame of U.S. politicians, political leaders, economic and financial leaders, Federal Reserve leaders, and all this kind of stuff. Many who have got to know the United States has no intention to pay back all the trillions of dollars of debt that they borrowed at something that's worth the same amount. Okay, you can just print up money and money be worth nothing. I consider the United States has been making dishonest profits from doing this. Pledges, by the way, that Habakkuk talked about are like treasury notes. We would call those pledges. Anyway, God warns about this in Ezekiel 22, starting verse 13. Behold, therefore I beat my fists at the dishonest profit you have made, and at the bloodshed which has been in your midst. Can your heart endure, or can your hands remain strong in the days when I shall deal with you? I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. I will scatter you among the nations, disperse you throughout the countries, and remove your filthiness completely from you. The United States has filthiness, it's got making dishonest profits. It's going to go through this, and it's going to lose this. Now, for the past couple of hundred years, the Israelite Anglo-Saxon nations of the United States, United Kingdom, have pretty well dominated the world, but that's going to end. And let's go to Hosea chapter 13. Starting in verse 12. It says, the iniquity of Ephraim, that would be the UK and the nations descended from it, English-speaking nations from there, is bound up. His sin is stored up. The sorrows of a woman in childbirth shall come upon him. It's like an unwise son. He should not stay long where the children are born. This thing about sorrow like a woman in childbirth, Jesus talked about that, but you can read about it in Luke 21, talking about getting toward the time of the Great Tribulation. Verse 14, I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction. Pity is hidden from my eyes. Though he is fruitful among his brethren, an east wind shall come. The wind of the Lord shall come from the wilderness, and the spring shall become dry. His fountain will be dried up. He shall plunder the treasury of every desirable prize. Samaria, the United States, is held guilty. This is, again, a prophecy. Even though the two sons of Joseph were Ephraim and Manasseh, sometimes the Bible shows in prophecy Ephraim and Samaria. This is one of those times. Samaria is held guilty, for she's rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their infants shall be dashed to pieces, and their women with child ripped open. Which you could also read about that in Lamentations. An east wind goes from the east and heads west, like from continental Europe to the UK or the United States. I kind of wondered if perhaps that's why the late Pastor General of the Old Worldwide Church of God, Herbert Armstrong, wrote the following. He's talking about the abomination. He says this refers to Daniel 11:31 and Matthew 24:15. It says, but it seems evident that a blessing is poured on the church and those who endure 1,335 days. Approximately 1,335 days prior to Christ's coming. But here's the part I wanted to read. That will be the time when the united Europe shall appear, the revival of the medieval Holy Roman Empire. 45 days later, the beast's armies will surround Jerusalem. 30 days later, the Great Tribulation will probably start with a nuclear attack on London and Britain, and possibly the same day or immediately thereafter on the United States and the Canadian cities. The Great Tribulation, we shall fully realize, it's the time of Jacob's trouble spoken about in Jeremiah 30, verse 7. And talks about Jacob's name was placed upon Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that prophecy about coming from the east, the east wind, so it was coming toward the west. I don't know if that's why he wrote that, but that is what happened. But in Psalm 106, verse 47, you don't have to go there. The Bible says, save us, O Lord our God, and gather us from among the Gentiles. The Gentiles will take over the Anglo-Saxon nations. Jeremiah 30, verse 11 says, for I am with you, says the Lord, to save you, though I make a full end of all the nations where I have scattered you. Yet I will not make a complete end of you, but I will correct you in justice, and will not let you go altogether unpunished. So yes, the punishment will end. Okay, the punishment is going to happen, but it will end. And this is in the Bible many times. For example, Ezekiel 11, starting verse 16. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, although I've cast them afar off from the Gentiles, and although I've scattered them among the countries, yet I shall be a little sanctuary for them in the countries where they have gone. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, I will gather you from the peoples and assemble you from the countries where you've been scattered. And I will give you the land of Israel. And they will go there, and they will take away all its detestable things and all its abominations from there. Then I will give them one heart and put a new spirit in them. I'll take out their stony heart out of their flesh, and shall give them a heart of flesh. They will walk in my statutes to keep my judgments and do them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God. Since we're in Ezekiel, let's go a few more chapters. Let's go to Ezekiel 20, starting verse 33. It says, as I live, says the Lord God, Ezekiel 20, starting verse 33, surely with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, with fury poured out, I will rule over you. I will bring you out of the peoples and gather you from the countries which you're scattered with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, with fury poured out. I will bring you into the wilderness of the people, and I will plead my case with you face to face. Just as I pleaded my case with your fathers in the land of Egypt, I will plead my case with you, says the Lord God. And you don't have to go there, but this is the last scripture I plan to actually quote, from Lamentations 4, verse 22. It says, the punishment of your iniquities accomplished, O daughter of Zion, he will send you into captivity. Captivity is going to happen. Now, these passages from Ezekiel were never fulfilled by the Jews returning to the Middle East. These are prophecies for the future. It's going to affect the United States as Anglo-Saxon descended allies, and it will come to pass. So while the United States, in my view, is the king of the West, and there's the reason the Bible doesn't talk about the king of the West because he gets destroyed, Daniel 11, verse 39. About 3.5 years after the start of the Great Tribulation, God's going to stop the punishment of those who were part of the king of the West. By that time, people will realize that they can and should walk into the statutes of God. Now, part of it will be from the testimony of the two witnesses. Part of it will be from what they may remember from the warnings that were given prior to the destruction of the United States. And part of it will probably come from God himself. Anyway, the United States, and to a lesser degree, its Anglo-Saxon allies, are the king of the West. They will cease to exist as they do now, but Jesus will return. Don't wait until then. The time to repent is now. Don't be among those who will be destroyed when the beast power comes to destroy the United States, the one I labeled the King of the West. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.